She thought the worst thing Ethan Rourke ever did to her was the night he wrapped both hands around her throat and told her she deserved it. She was wrong. The worst thing he ever did was survive long enough to do it again. This time, in front of the wrong man. Because the woman he cornered in that cafe wasn't just anyone's wife. She was carrying the heir to an empire built on silence and consequence. And the man who walked through that door wasn't coming to negotiate. If you've ever loved someone enough to burn the whole world down, this story is for you. Drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this reaches. And stay until the very end. You won't want to miss what happens next. The stick turned pink at 6:14 in the morning, and Nora Voss sat on the cold tile floor of her bathroom with her back pressed against the cabinet door and her knees pulled to her chest, staring at it like it was a grenade she hadn't meant to pull the pin on. 2 lines, clean and certain. She hadn't moved in 11 minutes. She knew because she'd been watching the small clock above the towel rack, the one Lucian had hung himself because she'd mentioned once offhand that she always lost track of time in the mornings. He hadn't said anything when he put it up. He never made a production of the things he did for her. He just did them, quietly, the way he did everything. That was the problem. That was the whole problem, sitting right there in 2 pink lines on a plastic stick. She loved him. God help her, she loved him completely. But love and fear were 2 things that had lived side by side in Nora's chest for so long she'd stopped being able to tell which was which. And right now, in the gray early light of a Tuesday morning, both of them were screaming. She finally stood. Her legs felt wrong, like the bones had been replaced with something softer. She ran the cold tap and splashed water on her face, gripped the edge of the sink, and looked at herself in the mirror. Dark circles, pale skin, hair still tangled from sleep. She looked exactly like what she was. A woman who had not slept properly in 3 weeks, who had been quietly vomiting every morning for the past 9 days, who had told herself it was stress, told herself it was the change in weather, told herself anything except the one true thing. She wrapped the test in a handful of tissue, buried it in the bottom of the trash bin, and tried to remember how to breathe normally. The bedroom door was still closed when she came out. She could hear Lucien moving on the other side of it, the soft drag of a drawer, the particular rhythm of him getting dressed, that unhurried precision he brought to everything. She stood in the hallway and pressed her palm flat against the cool plaster wall and told herself to go in there, to tell him, to just open her mouth and say the words. She couldn't do it. She didn't fully understand why. She'd turned it over in her mind for the 3 weeks she'd suspected, and she still couldn't land on a clean answer. It wasn't that she thought he'd be cruel. Lucian Moretti was not cruel to her. He had never once raised his voice at her in 2.5 years of marriage. He had never made her feel small or stupid or expendable. He was dangerous in ways that were real and documented and not spoken about in polite company, but he had never turned that danger toward her. And yet, she'd spent 4 years of her life with a man who'd also never turned cruel. At first. 4 years learning to read the temperature of a room the second she walked into it, learning to adjust her posture and her tone and the way she laughed so that nothing would set anything off. 4 years building a whole architecture of self-erasure, brick by careful brick, until the woman she'd been before Ethan Rourke felt like someone she'd read about in a book. She had clawed her way back from that. Slowly, badly, with a lot of wrong turns. She had rebuilt something that resembled herself. And then she had met Lucien, who had looked at her like she was a complete person, not a problem to be managed, and she had let herself believe that was possible, that she could be both safe and chosen at the same time. But a baby changed the math. A baby meant a new kind of exposure, a new kind of vulnerability she hadn't factored in. A baby meant that Lucien's world, the one he was slowly, deliberately pulling back from, the one with drivers who carried more than luggage and meetings that happened in rooms with no windows, that world would have a direct line to the one thing she could not afford to lose. The bedroom door opened. Lucien came out in a charcoal suit, tie not yet knotted, hanging loose around his collar. He was 41 years old and built like someone who had learned early that the world required you to take up space deliberately. Dark hair, some gray at the temples now. A jaw that could have been carved. Eyes that were, at this exact moment, fixed on her with the particular quality of attention that always made her feel like he was reading something she hadn't written yet. He stopped. "You didn't sleep," he said. Not a question. "I slept fine." He looked at her for another second, He had a way of pausing before he responded that most people found unnerving. She'd gotten used to it, mostly. You want coffee? I'll get it, she said. You have that call at 7. He nodded slowly, still watching her. His eyes dropped, just briefly, to her hands. She realized she'd been pressing them flat against her thighs and made herself stop. Nora, I'm fine, Lucian. I just didn't sleep great. It happens. Another pause. He crossed to the kitchen island, picked up his phone, scrolled through something without really looking at it. Gideon's downstairs. I want him with you today. You don't have to do that. I know I don't have to. He set the phone down. I want to. She turned away and poured herself a glass of water because she couldn't stomach the smell of coffee right now and didn't want to explain why. She heard him finish knotting his tie in the reflection of the window, heard him come up behind her, close but not touching, and felt the warmth of him there for a moment before he pressed one hand briefly against the back of her shoulder. I'll be done by 2, he said quietly. We can have dinner at home. She nodded. Her throat felt tight. He picked up his jacket from the chair, paused at the door. Whatever it is, he said, without turning around. I'll still be here at 2. Then he was gone. She stood at the window for a long time after that, watching the city below start its morning, and tried to figure out why kindness still made her flinch. She called her friend Maya from the elevator, not because she had anything specific to say, but because she needed a voice that wasn't inside her own head. Maya was practical and loud and had no patience for what she called spiraling before breakfast. I need to get out of the building, Nora said. Okay, where? I don't know, somewhere normal, somewhere that's just... She pressed the lobby button again, even though she'd already pressed it. Somewhere that doesn't feel like mine. Maya understood her well enough not to make a joke about that. Café Pernell, she said, the one on Archer Street. I'll meet you in 20. Café Pernell was the kind of place that had been there since before the neighborhood turned expensive. Scuffed wooden floors, mismatched chairs, a handwritten menu on a chalkboard, the smell of old coffee and something baking. Nora had gone there during the worst of her years with Ethan, when she'd needed somewhere that felt anonymous, somewhere nobody looked at her long enough to see anything. She hadn't been back in a long time. She probably should have recognized that as a sign. Gideon fell into step beside her when she came through the lobby. He was 45, solid, with a face that gave away nothing and a way of moving that made him look like he was taking a casual walk even when he was scanning every face in a 20-foot radius. She'd never asked him directly what he'd done before Lucian hired him. She suspected she didn't want to know. Café on Archer, she told him. I know it, he said, and that was the entire conversation. The morning was cold and bright, the street still thin with early traffic. She walked with her hands in her coat pockets and her shoulders tight and tried to focus on the specific physical reality of the sidewalk under her feet, the exhaust smell mixing with cold air, a delivery truck idling at the corner. She was good at this, at anchoring herself to the concrete and the immediate. She'd had to learn it. Maya was already there when she arrived, seated at a corner table with 2 coffees she hadn't ordered yet, just 2 glasses of water, because she'd known Nora well enough to know the coffee might not work today. You look terrible, Maya said, by way of greeting. Thank you. Sit down. Talk to me. Nora sat. She pulled off her coat and folded it over the back of the chair and stared at the table for a moment. Outside, through the front window, she could see Gideon stationed on the sidewalk, not quite in front of the door, but close enough. A man on a phone call, to any stranger, not to her. I'm pregnant, she said. Maya went very still. 9 weeks, I think, maybe 10. Okay, Maya said carefully. I haven't told him. Okay. A pause. Why not? Nora looked up. What if he... She stopped. She couldn't finish the sentence because she didn't fully know how it ended. What if he what? Was happy? Changed? Didn't change enough? She pressed her fingertips to her temple. What if the world he's trying to leave is bigger than his intention to leave it? Maya was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, You're not afraid of Lucien. No. You're afraid of what loving him costs. The words landed clean and Nora didn't answer them, which was its own kind of answer. She picked up the water glass and held it with both hands and looked out the window at the ordinary morning going on without her. That was when she saw him. She recognized the back of his head before she saw his face. Something animal in her body recognized it. The set of his shoulders, The particular way he stood with his weight on one hip, slightly cocky, slightly coiled. Her hands tightened on the glass. He turned. Ethan Rourke. He was 38 now. He'd put on weight, filled out in the jaw. He was wearing a gray jacket she'd never seen, standing outside the bakery 2 storefronts down, a coffee cup in one hand, phone in the other. He was laughing at something on the screen. He hadn't seen her yet. "Nora!" Maya's voice, low and urgent. "Nora, look at me." She couldn't. She couldn't move. She was sitting in a cafe on Archer Street, and it was 9 in the morning, and she was approximately 9 weeks pregnant, and she was watching the man who had spent 4 years methodically disassembling her personhood laugh at something on his phone like he'd never done a single moment's worth of harm in his life. Her body had gone to that old, familiar place, the one that still lived under everything she'd rebuilt, the one that remembered exactly how his hands felt, exactly how much air remained in a room when he decided to take up all of it. "Nora." Maya reached across the table and gripped her wrist. "Walk out the back, right now. I'll go first. You follow me." She should have done that. She knew, sitting there, that she should have done exactly that, but she didn't move fast enough. The door opened, and the cold came in with him, and Ethan Rourke looked up from his phone and saw her sitting at the corner table of the cafe where she used to hide from him, and something moved across his face that she recognized the way you recognize the sound of thunder. Not because you think it, but because your body already knows what comes next. He stopped. His eyes went to her face, then to her hands, still wrapped around the water glass. Then, slowly, to the slight change in the line of her coat across her midsection. She watched him do the math. "Well," he said. His voice was the same. She hadn't expected that to be the thing that broke her composure, but it was. She made herself not look away. She made her face do nothing. "Small world," he said, and came toward the table. "Don't," she said. He pulled out the chair across from her, the one Maya had been sitting in. Maya, who had slipped away toward the back of the cafe without Nora seeing her go, and sat down, setting his coffee cup on the table with a sound that was too casual, too deliberate. "Don't what?" He smiled. Not a warm smile. The kind of smile she'd spent 4 years learning the precise weight of. "I'm just saying hello. I'm here with someone. She left." He glanced toward the back. "Doesn't matter." He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "You look good, Nora. You really do. Few years have been kind to you." His eyes dropped to her midsection again. "Very kind, looks like." "Get up," she said. "Walk away." "Married now, huh?" He reached out and tapped one finger on the table, close to her hand. Not touching, just close. The exact geometry of it was familiar in a way that made her stomach turn. "Who is he?" She didn't answer. "Must be doing well for himself." Another tap, closer now. "Nice coat. Nice ring. Must be nice. I'm going to ask you one more time to leave." "Or what?" He looked at her with something that was almost curious, almost amused, the particular expression she remembered from the nights when she'd tried to set a boundary and he'd found it funny. "You got someone to call? Some husband who's gonna—" He stopped because his eyes had gone to her stomach again, and something in him shifted visibly. Something went dark and closed, and she recognized that too, that specific shuddering, and she had maybe 2 seconds of understanding what was coming before his hand shot across the table and closed around her wrist. She yanked back. He held. "Is it his?" he asked. Low now, almost quiet. The quiet was always worse. "That what this is? You're having some— Let go of me. You left," he said. And there it was. The real thing, under the smile, the thing that had always been there. "You just left. Like I was nothing, like 4 years of my—" His grip tightened. She felt the old instinct come up, the one that said, go small, go quiet, don't escalate. But there was something else in her now, something that hadn't been there before. Something that responded to his grip on her wrist with a cold, clear rage that she had not known she was carrying. "You went and got married, and you're having his—" "Take your hand off me." Her voice came out steady. She was shaking, but her voice was steady. "Right now." He didn't. He stood instead, and his chair scraped back, and the cafe went quiet around them, and she saw his face at the moment he decided she needed to understand something, and she was already pushing back from the table when his free hand came up and closed around her throat. Not a grab. A wrap. Both hands now, the wrist released, and she had one fraction of a second to think, in a voice that was very clear and very calm, that this was familiar too. And then the pressure started, and the sound in the cafe dropped away. And Nora Voss, who had survived Ethan Rourke once, who had built an entire life on the other side of him, felt her back hit the wall. She hadn't known was behind her and looked into the face of the man who had always believed he owned her, and understood that he still believed it. She got her hands up. She clawed. She got her heel against the baseboard and shoved. None of it moved him. The room was getting thin at the edges, and then the door came open with a sound like something being broken, and the cold rushed in again, and a voice said quietly and without any particular heat, "Take them off." The pressure stopped. Not immediately, not fast, but it stopped. Nora's knees buckled. She caught herself on the wall, got her breath in ragged and harsh, and looked up. Lucien Moretti stood in the doorway of Café Pernelle. No expression, no raised voice. His jacket was open, and his tie was straight, and he looked at Ethan Rourke with the focused, unhurried attention of a man who had already made every relevant decision. Gideon was a step behind him and to the left. The cafe was completely silent. Lucian's eyes moved from Ethan's face to Nora's throat, where the bruising was already beginning to show in the early light, and then down, just for a moment, just a fraction of a second, to the place where her hands had gone without her thinking, both of them pressing flat against her stomach. He looked back at Ethan, and now his face changed, not into anger, something colder than anger, something that didn't have a word for it in any language built for ordinary situations, the specific and total recalibration of a man who has understood, all at once, exactly how much he has underestimated the size of what he is willing to do. Ethan opened his mouth. Lucien said, "Don't," and Ethan Rourke, who had never in his life shown fear of any man, went very still. The silence in Café Pernelle had weight to it, the kind of silence that settles into a room when every person in it understands, at the same moment, that something irreversible is about to happen. Nobody moved. Not the barista who had pressed herself against the back counter with both hands flat on the espresso machine. Not the young couple by the window who had stopped mid-sentence and hadn't started again. Not the old man in the corner with his newspaper folded in his lap, who had gone completely still in the way that old men sometimes do when they recognize danger from a distance. Not from television, but from actual memory. Ethan Rourke stood with his hands no longer on Nora's throat, but not yet entirely at his sides. That transitional moment of a man whose body hadn't caught up to the shift in the room. His mouth was still partly open. His eyes had gone to Lucien and stayed there, doing the rapid animal calculation that the brain runs when it first measures a threat. Nora was against the wall. Her hands were still pressed flat below her ribs. She was breathing in shallow pulls, her throat burning, and she could feel her pulse in places she didn't normally feel it: jaw, wrists, the backs of her knees. She watched Lucien the way you watch something you love that is also, in this moment, something you cannot entirely predict. Lucien had not moved from the doorway. He didn't need to. He was looking at Ethan the way a man looks at arithmetic. Not with fury, not with the hot, visible anger that Nora had grown up fearing in men. The raised voice, the slammed door, the performance of temper. This was something else. This was the face of someone who had already resolved the situation in his mind and was simply waiting for the physical world to catch up. "Step away from her," he said. Ethan took one step back. Just one. Not out of obedience. The look on his face wasn't obedience, but because his body had moved before his pride could stop it. He caught himself, reset his shoulders, tried to reassemble something that looked like composure. "You don't know who you're—" he started. "I know exactly who I am," Lucien said. He stepped fully into the cafe. Gideon came in behind him and closed the door without being told, and the cold cut off, and the room was sealed. "The question is whether you know who she is." Ethan's eyes moved to Nora, then back. "She's nobody," he said, and even as he said it, something in his expression knew it was the wrong answer. "She's just some woman I used to—" "Stop!" Lucian's voice didn't rise. If anything, it dropped. "You're going to stand there quietly while I look at my wife's throat." Ethan processed the word wife. You could see it happen. His jaw shifted. Something moved through his eyes. Disbelief, recalculation, and beneath both of those, a threat of something that looked almost like humiliation. Lucien crossed to Nora. He stopped in front of her, close but not crowding her, and put two fingers under her chin to tilt her face up slightly, his eyes moving across the bruising already darkening along her neck with the focused attention of a man performing an assessment rather than an embrace. His thumb came up and brushed, very lightly, the edge of one of the marks. His face didn't change. Then his eyes dropped to her hands. She hadn't moved them. They were still pressed against her stomach, and she watched his gaze land there and stay, and she watched him understand. Not guess. Understand. The way he sometimes understood things she hadn't said, using whatever quiet, relentless attention he brought to everything about her. He looked back at her face. "Are you hurt?" he said. "Not are you okay." He never asked, "Are you okay?" He told her once, early on, that the question was useless, that people answered it automatically without thinking about whether it was true. So he always asked something specific. "No," she said. Her voice was rougher than she expected. He held her eyes for another second. Then he turned around. Ethan had been watching this with a specific kind of expression, the expression of a man recalibrating his understanding of how badly wrong he'd read the situation. He'd walked into a cafe on Archer Street at 9 in the morning and found a woman he used to own. He hadn't expected a husband. He certainly hadn't expected this one. "I didn't know," he said. The words came out differently than he probably intended, less defiant, more like something leaking. "All right? I didn't know she was—" "That's not actually relevant," Lucy Tien said. "I'm saying I wouldn't have. You put your hands around her throat." Lucian's voice had no texture in it. It was flat the way a road is flat. Not because nothing is beneath it, but because everything beneath it is very deliberately contained. "You did that in front of 6 witnesses and a security camera above the register. Whatever you thought you were doing or not doing doesn't change what you did." Ethan's eyes flicked to the camera, back to Lucy. His jaw tightened. "I'll pay for—" "You're going to stop talking now," Lucian said. Something in the way he said it made Ethan stop talking. Gideon had positioned himself between Ethan and the door without appearing to do so. He was looking at his phone. To anyone watching, he wasn't looking at his phone. Lucien reached into his jacket pocket and produced a card, plain white, a phone number, nothing else, and set it on the nearest table without looking at it. He said to the barista, without raising his voice, "Call that number. Tell them Lucy sent you. They'll send someone to take statements and clear the camera footage. Everyone here will be compensated for their time." The barista nodded. She looked like she was holding herself together with concentration. Lucien looked back at Ethan. "Outside," he said. Ethan didn't move immediately. There was a moment, maybe 3 seconds, where his body and his brain were in a conversation about whether he had any remaining play here, whether the math could shift, whether there was a version of this where he walked out of it intact. Nora had seen that calculation before, on his face, in other rooms. She knew what it looked like when it resolved. He walked to the door. Gideon opened it for him. The alley that ran alongside Café Pernelle was narrow and smelled like wet concrete and the back end of a kitchen. A delivery door stood propped open with a brick halfway down. The sound of the street reached them muffled and distant. Lucien walked in front of Ethan, Gideon behind. When they stopped, they formed a geometry that left Ethan in the only part of the alley with no exit he could reach in under 4 steps. Ethan knew enough to understand what that meant. He crossed his arms and uncrossed them and crossed them again. "Look," he started. "I understand you're upset. I understand this looks bad, but she what?" Lucien asked. "She provoked—" He stopped, looked at Lucien's face, stopped completely. "Finish it," Lucien said, quietly, almost gently. Ethan didn't. Lucien stood in front of him with his hands in his coat pockets, which was somehow worse than if they'd been out. Nora had come as far as the alley entrance and stopped there, and from where she stood she could see Lucien's profile. The absolute stillness of him, the way he wasn't performing anything, wasn't building toward something, wasn't working himself up. He was already there. He'd been there since he walked through the cafe door. "You think this is about me," Lucien said. "You think I'm angry because someone touched what's mine. That's the framing you're using. I can see it." He tilted his head slightly. "That's not what this is." Ethan said nothing. "You heard her before I knew her," Lucien said. "You spent 4 years taking something apart that took her 4 more years to rebuild. That's a debt I can't actually collect on. It's already done. A pause. But you put your hands around her throat this morning, in her ninth week. Ethan's eyes moved involuntarily. Ninth week of what? He said, and then his face changed as he arrived at the answer himself, and whatever was left of his composure shifted into something that looked for a moment almost like grief. Not for Nora, Nora didn't think, but for whatever it meant to him that she had moved entirely and completely beyond the borders of anything that had ever included him. He said. She's my wife, Lucien said. She's carrying my child. You put your hands around her throat. Those are the facts we're working with. Ethan's chin came up. So what? You kill me? In an alley? Some bravado came back into him, the muscle memory of a man who'd spent decades using his size and his certainty to override whatever was happening in a room. You don't even know me. You don't know what she... Lucien hit him once. Not a dramatic swing, not a performance. A short, precise strike. Open hand against the side of the neck. Pressure point. The kind of thing that drops the legs without breaking anything. And Ethan went down onto one knee on the wet concrete with a sound that was mostly surprise. He stayed there, breathing hard, one hand down. Lucien crouched in front of him. Here's what I know, he said, in the same tone he'd used for everything else. I know your full name. I know the car you drove here in and where it's registered. I know the apartment you moved into 4 months ago and the name of the woman in 4B who you've been inside twice this week. He let that settle. I know what you had for breakfast at the diner on Clement Street this morning, because you sat at the counter and you paid with a card, and the man 2 stools down from you works for me. Another pause. I knew who you were the week after Nora and I got married. I had you looked at then, and I decided you weren't a threat. He stood. I was wrong about that this morning. I won't be wrong about anything regarding you again. Ethan looked up at him from the wet ground, breathing through his nose, and the thing that was in his eyes now wasn't anger anymore. It was something simpler and more honest than anger. Gideon's going to drive you somewhere, Lucien said. You're not going to make it difficult for him. When you arrive, someone will explain your options to you. You'll have some. Not many, but some. He straightened his jacket. The option that ends with you in a position to ever enter this woman's line of sight, again, is not among them. He walked back to the alley entrance without looking at Ethan again. Nora stepped aside to let him pass. He stopped next to her. He didn't touch her. He looked at her throat again, in the gray morning light, and his jaw moved once, very slightly, and then he turned and walked toward the street. She followed him. The car was warm, black interior, the smell of leather, and something faintly woodsy that she'd always associated with Lucien without being able to name it. She sat in the back with her coat in her lap and looked out the window at the city going past. He sat next to her, not close, not touching, just present. 3 blocks. 4. How long? He said. She turned from the window. How long have you known? He said. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at his own hands in his lap, and she recognized this version of him, the one who had learned to deliver his hardest questions to the middle distance, to take the directness out of them so she didn't feel cornered. 3 weeks that I suspected, she said. This morning that I was sure. He nodded. You were going to tell me. It wasn't quite a question. Yes, she said. I was getting there. She pressed her fingers to her mouth for a second. I needed to think first. Think about what? She looked at him. He was still looking at his hands. Whether this changes things, she said. For you, for your timeline. Now he looked at her. My timeline. The transition, what you're building, what you're moving away from. She held his gaze. A child changes the exposure. I know you know that. He was quiet long enough that she heard the city through the glass, a bus, a horn somewhere in the distance. I was already going to accelerate it, he said. Because of the baby? Before the baby. He looked back at his hands. 3 months ago, I started moving the legal acquisition forward by 18 months. The remaining partnerships... He stopped, pressed his thumb into his palm. I was going to tell you when it was done. I didn't want to tell you it was happening and then have something delay it. She stared at him. 3 months ago. Yes. That's when She stopped. He looked at her. That's when I first thought I might be pregnant, she said. 3 months ago, when I started thinking about what it would mean. Something moved across his face. Not surprise exactly, more like the quiet recognition of a particular kind of irony, the kind that only happens to people who are genuinely trying, separately, toward the same thing, and miss each other's timing by just enough to cause damage. We're both idiots, she said. His mouth moved, not quite a smile, but in that direction, the closest he usually got in the car. Probably, he said. She reached across and put her hand over his. He turned his hand over and held hers, and they sat like that for the rest of the ride, not speaking, the city moving past outside, everything that still needed to be said left in the space between them for later. The penthouse was quiet at midday. She changed out of her coat and sat at the kitchen island with a glass of water while he made calls in his office. Brief, clipped conversations she could hear the rhythm of, but not the words. She'd learned not to listen to the specific words, early on, not because he asked her not to, just because there were things she preferred to maintain a comfortable arm's length from, and the specific vocabulary of whatever he was wrapping up in that room was one of them. She was on her second glass of water when he came out. He sat across from her at the island, took off his jacket, folded it over the stool beside him, rolled one cuff, then the other. She watched him do it, the methodical, unhurried quality of it, and wondered, not for the first time, how much effort it cost him to be this controlled all the time. Victor's asking questions, he said. She looked up. About the transition timeline. About what's triggering the acceleration. He picked up her water glass, considered it, set it down. I had a dinner with the lieutenants last week that I didn't mention to you. Okay. Victor made a comment about your vulnerability. As a factor, as something that could be used. His eyes came up to hers. He phrased it as a concern. It wasn't concern. She felt the air in the room change slightly, not because of fear. She'd gotten past the kind of fear that made her need to leave rooms when things got complicated. It was something else, the specific, heavy feeling of understanding that there were forces in motion that she'd known were there but had chosen not to look at directly, and that they were now looking at her. How much does he know? She said. He suspects the pregnancy. He doesn't have confirmation. Lucian's eyes didn't waver. He will within a week. These things don't stay contained. What does that mean for you? It means I need to move faster than I planned. He pressed one hand flat on the counter. And it means I have to deal with Victor directly, before he decides to deal with me. Deal with him how? He looked at her steadily. The way I deal with problems. She held his gaze. I'm not going to ask you to have this conversation with me as if I don't understand what you do, she said. I've always understood what you do. I chose you anyway. I know you did. But I need to know that the choice I made, that the world you told me you were building toward, I need to know that's still real. That it wasn't just something you said because you thought I needed to hear it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he stood, went around the island, stopped in front of her. He put both hands on the counter on either side of her and looked at her from close enough that she could see the thing in his eyes that he didn't usually let surface. Not the control, not the calm, but the thing underneath the control and the calm that had been running quietly since the cafe, since the moment his eyes had gone to her hands pressed against her stomach and understood what they were protecting. Before this baby is born, he said, I will have finished everything, every piece of it, whatever's left. He didn't blink. Your child is not growing up inside what I grew up inside. That's not a plan. That's a fact. She believed him. That was the complicated thing about Lucien. So she always infuriatingly believed him. She put her hand against the side of his face. He turned into it slightly, a reflex, almost imperceptible. Then handle Victor, she said. Whatever that means. Handle it. He nodded. He was halfway back to his office when his phone buzzed on the counter. He picked it up, read whatever was on the screen, and went very still. What? She said. He held the phone out to her. A photograph. Taken through a long lens. She could tell from the slight compression of distance. A photo of their building's entrance taken from the building across the street. Time-stamped 40 minutes ago. In the frame, partially cropped, the doorman, the lobby glass, and her, stepping out in her coat. Behind her, slightly blurred but visible, Gideon's shoulder. Below the photograph, 3 words. Congratulations on everything. And underneath that, a small image. Low resolution, old, the kind of thing photographed from a physical object and then resent digitally. A baby rattle, antique looking, wrapped with what appeared to be a red ribbon. Nora set the phone down on the counter with great care. "Who sent it?" she said. "Unknown number." Lucien's voice had gone back to the flat, contained register. "Routed through 3 servers, we won't trace it in the next hour." "But you know who it is." He picked the phone back up, looked at it for another second, set it face down. "I have a theory," he said. "Victor. Or someone Victor is talking to." He turned and looked at her, and for the first time since the cafe his control cost him something visible. A tightening around the eyes. A fractional tightening of everything. "This isn't a warning," he said. "This is someone telling me they've already been watching." The room felt different now. The afternoon light coming through the tall windows, the clean lines of the kitchen, the glass and the stone, and the carefully curated normality of their life together. All of it was the same as it had been an hour ago. But the meaning of it had shifted. It was a set now, not a home, a background, something that could be photographed from the building across the street by someone who knew exactly when to press the shutter. Her hand went to her stomach without her choosing it. Lucien watched her do it. "I'm going to call Marco," he said. "I need you to go to the bedroom and stay there until I come to you. Don't go near the windows." "Lucien, Nora." He crossed back to her in 3 steps. He took her face in both hands, tilted it up, held it there. He looked at her with the full weight of the thing he usually kept below the surface, all of it, and she felt it the way you feel something structural. "I need you to let me do what I know how to do. Can you do that?" She put her hands over his. "Yes," she said. He kissed her forehead. Once. Firm. Then he picked up his phone and turned away, and she heard his voice shift register as the call connected, dropping into something fast and low and completely businesslike. And she walked to the bedroom, and she sat on the edge of the bed in the quiet afternoon light, and she thought about the photograph, the long lens, the compression of distance, the doorman and the glass and herself and the 3 words that were not, in any universe she could construct, an accident. She thought about Victor Salazar, who had sat at a dinner table and called her a vulnerability. She thought about the rattle wrapped in red, and she thought about Lucien, in the next room, who had promised her their child would not grow up inside the world he'd grown up inside, and who was now on the phone doing the specific thing that would either make that promise possible or cost him everything trying. Her hand stayed where it was, flat and steady, below her ribs. She waited. The call lasted 22 minutes. Nora knew because she watched the clock on the nightstand, the one Lucien had put there when she'd mentioned she sometimes woke at 3 in the morning and couldn't tell how much dark was left. She'd been watching it since she sat down on the edge of the bed, tracking the minutes the way you track something when your mind needs something concrete to hold on to. 22 minutes. Then the sound of his voice stopped. She heard him cross the living room, heard the particular weight of his footsteps, which she knew as well as she knew her own. He stopped outside the bedroom door for a moment. She could feel it, that pause, the specific quality of him collecting something before he came in. And then the door opened. He looked the same as he always did. That was the thing about Lucien that had taken her the longest to understand. The way his face processed catastrophe and ordinary Tuesday afternoons with the same controlled surface. But she'd been married to him for 2.5 years, and she knew where to look now. The slight tension at the corner of his left eye, the way his shoulders sat, fractionally higher than usual. The fact that he'd taken his tie off completely and left it somewhere in the other room, which he never did before 7 in the evening. "Sit down," she said. He sat in the chair by the window rather than on the bed. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and looked at the floor for a moment before he looked at her. "How bad?" she said. "The photograph was sent from inside this building." She felt the words land in the specific way that bad news lands when you've already begun to suspect it. Not as a shock, but as a confirmation that drops the floor out anyway. "From inside," she repeated. The server routing was designed to look external. Marco's team took it apart in 40 minutes. He pressed his thumb into the heel of his other hand. The original send point was a device registered to a resident on the 14th floor. "We're on the 22nd. "Yes." "Who's on 14? "A property management company. Shell Corporation." It has 4 legitimate-looking tenants and has been paying its building fees on time for 11 months. He looked up at her. It was set up 13 months ago, 2 months before the first public mention of the Haverford acquisition, the first piece of the legitimate transition that made the news. She worked through the timeline. Someone put a surveillance position in this building before you'd publicly announced anything. Before I'd privately announced anything. I hadn't told my own lieutenants about Haverford until 8 months ago. He stopped. His jaw moved. Someone knew what I was planning before I'd told anyone inside my own organization. The room was very quiet. Outside the windows, the city was moving through its afternoon the way it always did. Indifferent, continuous, entirely unaware of the specific weight settling into this particular room on the 22nd floor. "There's a second thing," Lucienne said. She waited. Gideon ran the entry logs for the 14th floor unit going back 6 months. He stood. He couldn't stay seated. She watched him stand and move to the window, stop with his back to the glass, arms crossed. "One of the access cards used in the last 30 days is registered to a building maintenance contractor. Routine visits, logged properly, no flags." He paused. "The contractor company is owned, through 2 holding entities, by a man named Daniel Reese." The name meant nothing to her for a moment. Then it did. "Victor's brother-in-law," she said. "Former brother-in-law. They had a public falling out 3 years ago. Victor made sure everyone in the organization knew about it." His voice was flat, but not empty. There was something working beneath the flatness, something she could feel from across the room. "It's not a coincidence, it's a performance. A falling out you make sure everyone witnesses is not a falling out. It's a distancing. He's been planning this for over a year," she said. "At minimum." She stood. She didn't mean to. Her body just made the decision, the same way it had moved her hands to her stomach in the cafe, some autonomic response to the need to not be sitting down anymore. She crossed to the window and stood next to him, not touching, both of them looking out at the city. "The dinner," she said. "The one where he made the comment about my vulnerability." "Yes." "He was already watching us then." "He was already watching us when we got married," Lucian said. "The dinner was him deciding I was far enough into the transition, far enough from the tools I used to use, that he could begin to move openly." He turned his head and looked at her. "He doesn't know I've held back certain capabilities. He thinks the version of me that's been building legitimate businesses for 3 years is the only version left." She looked back at him. "Is he wrong?" A long pause, long enough that it was its own answer. "No," he said. "But not in the way he thinks." She understood what he meant. She didn't ask him to explain it further. "What do you need to do?" she said. "Tonight I need to meet with Marco and 2 others. In person, not on phones." He turned fully to face her. "And I need you out of this building." "To where?" "There's a property in the mountains. It's not registered to me or to any entity connected to me. It was purchased through a personal trust that predates the organization by 15 years. He said it like a recitation, like something he'd planned and put away and hoped never to actually use. "Gideon will take you. I'll follow within 48 hours, once I've managed the immediate—" "You'll follow," she said. "Yes, within 48 hours. Nora, I heard you." She turned away from the window. "I just want you to understand that I heard exactly what you said, and I'm holding you to it. 48 hours. 48 hours, he said. "I promise." She had learned, with Lucienne, that his promises were architectural. He didn't make many of them, but the ones he made were load-bearing. She'd never known him to break one. She went to the closet and started pulling things down from the shelf. They left the building at 6 in the evening through the parking structure's lower exit, in a car she'd never seen before. A dark gray SUV with plates she didn't recognize and a driver who said nothing and needed no directions. Gideon sat in the passenger seat. She sat in the back with a bag she'd packed in 23 minutes and her coat over her lap, and the particular feeling of the city moving past the windows for what might be, she understood, the last time for a while. Lucian had walked her to the car. He'd said goodbye in the concrete gray of the parking structure, one hand on the side of her face, his forehead briefly against hers. No performance of it, just the fact of it, clean and physical, the way he did everything. 48 hours, she'd said. 48 hours, he'd said. She'd gotten in the car. She didn't let herself watch him walk away. She'd learned that one the hard way, in a different context, with a different man years ago, that watching someone walk away gave the moment more weight than was useful. She looked at the back of Gideon's head instead, at the gray wool of his jacket, and said nothing as the car climbed the exit ramp and moved into the evening. The estate was 3 hours out of the city, up a road that turned to packed gravel 40 minutes before they arrived. No lights visible from the road. The house itself was stone and timber, built into the side of a ridge, every window shuttered. It looked like something that had been waiting quietly for a long time. Gideon walked the perimeter while the driver handled the bags. Nora stood in the gravel and looked up at the tree line and breathed the cold mountain air and tried to identify what she was feeling. Not fear, exactly. Something more like the sensation of being placed outside time, the city and the photograph and Ethan and the rattle and Victor Salazar and the entire machinery of the last 12 hours all continuing to turn without her, somewhere below, while she stood in the dark on a ridge in the mountains. Her hand went to her stomach. "Clear," Gideon said, coming back around the corner of the house. "Motion sensors are active. I'll do rotations every 90 minutes. You don't have to stay outside." "I know." He moved past her toward the door. "Come on. It's cold." The inside was clean and stocked. Someone had prepared it recently without being told to prepare it for Nora specifically, which meant Lucien had arranged it before today, before the photograph, before the cafes. She didn't know when exactly, and she thought about asking Gideon, and then thought better of it, because she suspected the answer would be something like 6 months ago. And she wasn't certain she was ready to sit with what that implied about how long Lucien had been quietly preparing for the possibility of a moment like this one. She made herself tea. She sat at the kitchen table with her hands around the cup and tried to construct a timeline in her mind. Victor's surveillance, the Shell Corporation on the 14th floor, the baby rattle photograph, Daniel Reese and his maintenance access card, and kept arriving at the same center point. This had been in motion for over a year, long before her pregnancy was known, long before Ethan Rourke had walked into a cafe and grabbed her by the throat, which meant Ethan was not the danger. Ethan had been a catastrophic, stupid accident, a bad morning, a wrong place, a man who couldn't let go of the idea that he'd once owned something. He'd been terrifying, and he was now handled. In whatever way Lucien handled things, she chose not to look at directly. But he was not the architecture of the threat. Victor was the architecture. And Victor had been building it while everyone was watching something else. She was still sitting there, cup cooling between her palms, when her phone vibrated on the table. She looked at the screen. Lucien. She picked up. "You're there," he said. "We're here. The house is—" She looked around at the low light and the stone walls. "It's fine. It's good. Are you—" "I'm at Marco's." Background noise, faint, voices, movement. "I have something to tell you, and I need you to let me finish before you respond." She set the cup down. "All right. We went back through the communication logs from the dinner last week. Full sweep, every device in the room." A pause. "The leak about the pregnancy isn't Victor." She frowned. "What?" Victor knew about the transition acceleration. He suspected the pregnancy. But the photograph, the one sent to my phone today, the metadata when Marco fully stripped it, includes an embedded location tag that whoever sent it didn't know to scrub. His voice was careful, controlled. "The photo was taken from the 14th floor, yes, but the device that sent it to my number was inside my office building, Nora. Not the penthouse. My office. Sent from inside the building where I work. From a device that was in that building for the meeting I had this morning before the cafe." She sat very still. "The people in that meeting," she said, 6 individuals, including Marco, including my personal assistant." A pause. "Including 2 people who have been with the organization for over a decade. You trust all of them." "I trusted all of them." He said it in the past tense, deliberate. "So Victor has someone inside your inner circle." "Not someone," Lucien said. "Nora, the device. The way it was configured, the routing, the scrubbing techniques, what was scrubbed, and what wasn't." Marco recognized the methodology. He'd seen it before. The pause this time was longer. He'd seen it because it matched the techniques used by the person he trained. The one person in my organization he personally brought in and vouched for. She felt something cold move through her. Who? She said. He said a name she recognized. Not Victor. Not Daniel Reese. Not anyone she'd thought to look at. A name she'd heard at their dinner table. A name she'd heard Lucien use with something that, from him, came as close to trust as he ever got. She couldn't speak for a moment. Nora? I'm here. There are two possibilities, he said. Either he was turned in the last year, money, pressure, something we don't know about yet. Or he was never what he presented himself as, and I spent 3 years operating with a dead man's switch inside my own house. Another pause. Neither one is recoverable in the usual way. You understand what I mean. She understood. She didn't say so. How long until you know which one? She said. We're going to find out tonight. His voice was entirely flat now, the way it got when he was doing something that required him to be flat. I need you to stay on that property and not open the door for anyone except Gideon. Not for a call from me telling you to let someone in. Not for anything that seems routine. Nothing. Lucien, I'm not being dramatic. I know you're not. If something happens to my communication... He stopped. She heard him breathe once, slow and deliberate, the way he did when he was controlling something. If you don't hear from me by 6 tomorrow morning, Gideon has a secondary number. He knows what to do. I don't like this conversation, she said. I know. I really don't like this conversation. I'll be there in 48 hours. His voice dropped on the last sentence, just slightly, enough that she heard the thing underneath it. Not weakness, but the specific weight of a man who is making a promise in full knowledge of what it might cost him to keep it. 48 hours, she said. The line was quiet for a moment. Go to sleep if you can, he said. The bed in the east room. The mattress is better. How do you know which mattress on... Go to sleep, Nora. He hung up. She sat at the kitchen table with the phone in her hand, and the deadline and the name he'd said still moving through her head. She turned it over, looking for the thing she'd missed, the angle she'd failed to see, the specific moment when she'd been in a room with this person, and the wrongness of it should have registered and hadn't. She couldn't find it. That was what frightened her most. Not the betrayal itself, but the fact that it had been invisible. Not a crack she'd looked at and chosen to ignore. A smooth surface, all the way down. She went to find Gideon. He was in the front room, standing at the window with the shutter cracked 2 inches, looking out at the dark tree line. He turned when she came in. He called you, Gideon said. Not a question. He told me about... She stopped. She didn't know how much Gideon knew, and she realized she didn't know whether Gideon himself had been in that morning meeting, and for one horrible second she stood in the doorway of the front room and looked at the man who had been beside her for 2.5 years, who had been in the cafe, who had come through the door with Lucien, who had driven Ethan Rourke away in the alley, and felt the specific, nauseating vertigo of not knowing where the ground was. Gideon read her face. He reached into his jacket and put his phone on the side table, face up. Then he turned out his pockets, both of them, one at a time, everything on the table. His watch, his keys, a small folding knife. He did it without being asked, without any display of offense. He did it the way someone does something when they understand exactly why it's being done. I wasn't in the meeting, he said. I was with you, at the cafe. He looked at her steadily. I've been with you every minute since 7:45 this morning. You know that. She let the breath out. I know, she said. I'm sorry. Don't be. He picked his things back up. You're right to check. You should check everything right now. Don't apologize for it. She leaned against the door frame. Her legs were tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical exertion. He said to go to sleep. He's right. I won't. I know. Gideon looked back at the window. The east bedroom has the better sight lines. If something comes up the road, you'll hear it earlier from there. She almost asked him how he knew which room had the better sight lines, and then she realized that was also something Lucien had arranged in advance, and she stopped asking. She went to the east bedroom and lay down on the better mattress in the dark, with her coat still on and her phone on the pillow beside her, and the name he'd said turning over and over in the quiet of her mind like a stone she was looking for the underside of. She didn't sleep. At 2:47 in the morning, her phone buzzed. Not Lucien's number, a number she didn't recognize. She picked up, static. Then a voice. Not Lucien, not anyone she recognized, filtered and flat. Mrs. Moretti, the estate on Ridgeback Road. You have approximately 4 hours before your location is no longer secure. This message is courtesy. What happens next is not. The line dropped. She was already sitting up, already moving, already through the door into the hallway before the phone had fully left her ear, her voice coming out hard and even in the dark. Gideon. He was in the hallway before she finished saying his name. She didn't know if he'd been sleeping or just stationed there in the dark, and it didn't matter. Someone called me, she said. Unknown number. They said 4 hours. Gideon's face did the thing it did when he was running calculations. Completely still, eyes moving, processing. Then he moved past her toward the front room, and she followed and watched him pull a second phone from somewhere inside his jacket, one she hadn't seen before, and dial without looking at the keypad. It rang. She counted the rings. 3, 4, 5. No answer. Gideon dialed again. Same result. He looked at her, and in the low light of the front room, with the mountain dark pressed against every window, she watched something move across his face that she had never seen there in 2.5 years. Not fear, but the thing adjacent to fear that lives in competent people when the plan they trusted stops responding. I can't reach him, Gideon said. She stood in the middle of the room in her coat and her exhaustion, 9 weeks pregnant, in a stone house on a mountain ridge with her husband unreachable, and 4 hours until whatever was coming came up the road, and she understood with complete and terrible clarity that she was the only decision-maker left in this building. She straightened. Tell me what weapons are in this house, she said. Gideon looked at her for exactly 1 second. Then he moved toward the back hallway and said, Follow me. And the woman who had spent 4 years learning to make herself smaller, who had spent 2 more years learning to trust her own edges again, who had sat on a cold bathroom floor at 6 in the morning holding a pink-lined stick and been afraid of what the future might cost. That woman followed him into the dark without hesitating, because the only thing between the future and this moment was whatever she was willing to become to protect it. The back hallway of the stone house ended at a utility room. Washer, water heater, a chest freezer humming against the far wall. Gideon went to the freezer and opened it and reached past whatever was inside and came up with a black case about the size of a carry-on bag, sealed with 2 combination locks. He set it on top of the washer and worked both locks without looking at her. How long have you known about this, she said, since I swept the house when we arrived? You knew it was here. I know where everything is. He lifted the lid. Always. Inside, 2 handguns, both secured in foam cutouts, a folding knife larger than the one he carried, 2 radios, a medical kit in a red pouch, 3 loaded magazines per weapon, wrapped in cloth, and at the bottom, beneath all of it, a folded piece of paper. He handed her the paper without explanation. She unfolded it. Lucian's handwriting. She would have known it anywhere. The particular compression of it, the way he formed his 7s with a crossbar, the slight forward lean of every letter like the words were moving towards something. It said, if Gideon is showing you this, things have gone wrong. Don't panic. The panic uses time you need for other things. There's a vehicle in the outbuilding at the north end of the property, keys behind the left rear wheel. The road east from the property connects to Route 9 after 6 miles. Take it. Don't wait for me. I will find you. I always find you. L. She read it twice, then she folded it and put it in her coat pocket. When did he write this? She said. I don't know exactly. Gideon checked both weapons with the efficient, unconscious speed of someone doing something their hands knew better than their brain. It was in the case when the case was delivered to this property, 6 months ago. 6 months ago. She pressed the folded paper flat against her ribs through the coat and told herself to focus. 4 hours was the call, she said. That was, she checked her phone, 31 minutes ago. 3.5 hours then. He handed her one of the guns. Do you know how to use this? She looked at it. A compact semi-automatic, lighter than she expected. He taught me. 2 years ago. Range? Not... She stopped. Not this. It's not different, Gideon said. Same mechanics. The situation is louder. He looked at her steadily. Keep the safety on until you need it off. Both hands. Don't hold your breath. Breathe through it. You know this. She wrapped her hand around the grip. It was cold. The cold grounded her. We can't just wait for them, she said. No. We need to move before they expect us to move. Yes. He closed the case. The call was a courtesy, which means someone wants you alive, or wants you running in a specific direction. He picked up both radios, handed her one. We're not going to run in any direction until we understand which it is. How do we understand that in 3.5 hours? We don't wait 3.5 hours. He looked at the wall like he was seeing through it to the road. We move in 20 minutes, before they're in position. The vehicle Lucien mentioned, we're not taking the vehicle. He moved back toward the front of the house, and she followed. A vehicle on a mountain road at 3 in the morning is visible and predictable. We go on foot to the ridge, we observe the road approach, and we decide from there. On foot, in the dark. 3.5 months pregnant. She caught herself. 9 weeks. He stopped and looked at her. Tell me you can't do it, he said. Not a challenge, a genuine question, the kind that wanted a true answer, not a brave one. She thought about the folded letter against her ribs. She thought about the pink stick on a bathroom floor 12 hours ago, which felt like a different life now. She thought about what she'd said to Lucien at the kitchen island, handle Victor, whatever that means. I can do it, she said. He nodded, moved again. The mountain cold at 3 in the morning was a different animal from the city cold. It had weight and edge to it, and it came from every direction at once. Up from the ground, down from the tree cover, sideways off the ridge in irregular gusts. Nora pulled her coat tight and kept her eyes on the back of Gideon's jacket and put each foot where he put his, on the packed dirt and the frozen pine needles and the occasional exposed rock that caught the moonlight enough to see by. She counted her breaths. In for 4, out for 4. Lucien had taught her that too, years ago, not for this context. For the night she woke at 3 in the morning and couldn't locate the floor. It worked the same way now. It kept the edges from dissolving. They reached the ridge in 14 minutes. The ridge gave a sight line down to the road, a gray-white strip of packed gravel in the moonlight, running straight for about 300 yards before it curved left and disappeared into the tree line. Gideon went flat against a rock outcropping at the ridge lip, and she pressed in beside him and looked down. Nothing yet. The road was empty and still. Then a light. Far back in the tree line, before the curve. Not moving. Stationary, like a vehicle with lights off and one interior light on. There, she said. I see it. He had binoculars she hadn't seen him take from anywhere. He looked through them for 15 seconds. One vehicle. I can see 2 individuals. Maybe 3. It's not 3.5 hours. No. He lowered the binoculars. The 4-hour call was to make you react, barricade, call for help, to make you predictable. His jaw was tight. They moved sooner because they know the house's vulnerability windows, which means they've been here before. They've walked this property. Victor's people. Yes, or whoever Victor is working with. He looked at the stationary light again. They're waiting for a signal. They haven't moved yet. A signal from who? He didn't answer immediately. Then, someone who needed to confirm you were still in the house. She understood. The courtesy call. It wasn't a warning, it was a confirmation. Someone calling to verify she'd picked up, that the phone number was active, that she was awake and present and presumably frightened and inside the building. The call confirmed I was here, she said. They're waiting for a second signal. Yes, from inside the organization. She thought about the name Lucien had said, the man she'd had at her dinner table. From whoever told Victor about this location. Yes. Which means there might be someone coming to the house to give that signal, to check that I'm... She stopped, looked back at the house, dark and shuttered, below them and to the left. Someone might already be on their way to the property, coming from a different direction. Gideon had already turned to look at the north approach. She saw his hand move to his weapon and stay there. Go back to the house, he said. Lock the east bedroom. Don't open it for anyone but me. Gideon? Nora. He looked at her with the specific directness he used when he was done negotiating. I can't watch the road and watch the north approach and keep you in my sight. I need you in a fixed position so I know where you are. Can you do that? She wanted to argue. She felt the argument physically, a tension in her chest that wanted to push back against being placed somewhere while things happened around her. She'd spent 4 years in exactly that position, and it had cost her everything. But this was different. She knew it was different. Gideon wasn't placing her somewhere to control her. He was placing her somewhere because the geometry of the situation required it. "Yes," she said. "If someone comes to the door who isn't me, don't engage. There's a latch on the inside of the east bedroom that will slow a door breach by 90 seconds. Use it. Use the window if you have to. It's 8 feet to the ground on soft soil. 8 feet. Land on your side, not your feet." He held her gaze. "You know what to protect." She did. She went back down the ridge. The east bedroom was cold and dark, and she didn't turn on any lights. She sat on the floor with her back against the side of the bed, facing the door, the safety of the gun between her right thumb and the frame. She counted her breaths. She heard the first sound at 3:48, not from the front, from the north side of the house, a scrape of something against the stone exterior, too irregular to be wind, too quiet to be Gideon coming back. She got to her feet without making noise. The scraping moved, toward the back, toward the utility room. She crossed to the bedroom door and pressed her ear to it and heard the utility room door. She'd closed it on the way back. She was certain she'd closed it, open with the specific sound of someone who knows how to open a door quietly and is 90% successful. One person, moving slowly. She thought about what Gideon had said. Fixed position, 90 seconds if she latched the door. Window, if she had to. She put her hand on the latch, and then a voice, low and directly outside her door. "Nora, it's me. Don't shoot." A voice she knew. Marco. Lucian C's head of security, the man who had run the metadata analysis on the photograph, the man Lucian had called from the penthouse while she was packing. Her hand stayed on the latch. "How did you get here?" she said through the door. "I drove. Lucien's been trying to reach Gideon for 2 hours. He sent me." "Lucian sent you?" "Yes." "Then tell me something only Lucian would know to tell you." A pause. Then Marco said, "He said to tell you the clock in the bathroom keeps better time than the one by the bed, and you should trust it." She closed her eyes. The bathroom clock. The one he'd hung because she'd mentioned losing track of time in the mornings. A detail so small and specific and private that it could only come from one person. She opened the latch and opened the door. Marco was 50, lean, with close-cropped gray hair, and the kind of face that had been handsome before too many bad years worked on it. He was in a jacket she didn't recognize, and he was breathing harder than usual, and there was something on the left sleeve that in the darkness took her a moment to identify as blood that wasn't recent enough to be wet. "Where's Lucian?" she said. "In the city. He can't leave yet." Marco stepped back to give her room. "The situation with... He told me what he told you on the phone." He glanced at the gun in her hand. "The individual they were going to question. He got out." She felt the floor shift. Got out. 2 hours ago, someone helped him. We don't know who yet. Marco rubbed the back of his neck. "Lucian's managing 3 fires right now. He needed me here." "There are people on the road," she said. "I know. I passed the access point they're using. 2 vehicles now, not 1. He looked at the window. "They'll move within the hour. The signal they've been waiting for, the person who was supposed to send it isn't going to. That buys us time, but not much." "Where is Gideon?" "I don't know." She looked at him. "I came up the north approach," he said. "I didn't see him on the ridge." She crossed to the window and looked out at the dark tree line and felt the first real spike of cold fear. Not the managed, breathe-through-it version, but the actual thing, the one that lives in the back of the throat. Gideon always came back. "Try his radio," she said. Marco had a radio. He keyed it. Static. He tried twice more. Nothing. She looked down at her own radio, the one Gideon had given her in the utility room, and realized she hadn't heard it in the last 20 minutes, and the quiet of it now felt different than it had before. "We need to check the ridge," she said. "We need to leave," Marco said. "Nora, we need to—" "Gideon is on that ridge," she said. Her voice came out hard and flat, the way Lucien's did when he was done with a conversation. "I'm not leaving this property without knowing where he is." Marco looked at her. Something shifted in his assessment of her. She saw it happen, a minor recalibration. 5 minutes?" he said. 5 minutes? They went out the north door. The ridge was a 4-minute climb in the dark. She made it in 3, following the path she'd memorized on the way back down, her breath coming in hard, visible clouds. the gun in her right hand and the radio in her left. She heard him before she saw him. A sound like something shifting against rock. Not clean movement, but the weighted, effortful sound of someone repositioning with a body that was not fully cooperating. Gideon was against the same rock outcropping. He'd changed position, rolled partially behind it, which was why she hadn't seen him at the ridge lip. His right hand was pressed against his left side, below the ribs, and his breathing was the kind of breathing she could hear from 8 feet away. Controlled, deliberate, expensive. Gideon. She was beside him before Marco reached the ridge. "There's a third vehicle," he said, without preamble. "Came up the east track. I didn't have the angle on it. Someone was already on the ridge when I got back up here." He paused to breathe. "I handled it." She looked at the dark shape in the rock shadows that she'd taken for a fallen branch and understood it wasn't. "How bad?" she said. He moved his hand slightly from his side. Even in the moonlight, the amount was significant. "I've had worse," he said. "When?" "Fallujah." He almost smiled. This is a significant step down from Fallujah. Marco was already opening the medical kit. He'd brought it, she realized, from the utility room, which meant he'd known to look for it, which meant Lucien had told him exactly what was in the house. She watched Marco work and kept her eyes on the road below and the tree line and the 2 stationary lights that had been joined just in the last few minutes by a third. 3 vehicles. She counted what she knew. Gideon compromised. Marco here with unknown backup capacity. Her with a gun and 9 weeks of something irreplaceable that she was not going to let be used as leverage. And whatever Lucien was managing in the city, 3 hours away, with a trader loose and his phones going quiet. She keyed the radio. "Lucien." Static. She tried again. "Lucien, it's me. If you can hear this, we're on the ridge. Gideon is down. Not critical. 3 vehicles on the road. Marco is with us. We need..." A burst of static, then, barely audible, 5 words cut across the frequency in Lucien's voice, stripped down by distance and interference to just the essential thing, the load-bearing thing, the thing she knew he'd use his last second of transmission range to say, "I'm 20 minutes out." She pressed her back against the rock and looked down at the 3 sets of headlights that had just come on simultaneously on the road below. No longer stationary, no longer patient, rolling now toward the property with the specific, unhurried confidence of people who have decided that waiting is over. 20 minutes. She looked at Marco, who was finishing the field dressing on Gideon's side, his hands quick and practiced. She looked at Gideon, who had straightened against the rock and was checking his weapon with the hand that still worked without hesitation. She looked at the gun in her own hand, the safety still on, both hands around the grip the way Lucien had taught her in a range 2 years ago on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, when this had all seemed theoretical. 20 minutes. 3 vehicles coming up a gravel road. 1 ridge. She clicked the safety off. And below them, the first vehicle turned through the property gate, and its headlights swept across the front of the stone house, and the night split open with the sound of doors and boots and the particular silence of men who are moving with a purpose they've already decided they're committed to. And Nora Voss, who had never fired a weapon at anything that could fire back, took a breath and held the ridge and did not move, because the only thing between the next 20 minutes and everything she was going to have on the other side of them was the thing she'd been quietly becoming. The first vehicle stopped 20 yards from the front of the house, and 4 men got out. Nora counted them from the ridge. 4 doors, 4 shapes moving in the sweep of headlights. And then the lights cut and the dark swallowed them, and she was tracking by sound and moonlight and the small specific sounds that boots make on gravel when the people wearing them are trying not to make sound. The second vehicle parked behind the first. 3 more. The third pulled across the gate entrance. 2. Staying with the vehicle. 9 total. She counted again to be sure. 9. She looked at Gideon, who had gotten to his knee with Marco's help, his weapon up, his breathing still expensive but controlled. She looked at Marco, who had his own gun out now and was watching the approach with the focused patience of someone who had done this before in worse conditions and was allocating himself accordingly. She looked at her own hands. Steady. Not because she wasn't afraid. She was afraid, completely and physically, fear running through her like electrical current, but because the fear had somewhere to go now. It had converted itself into something with a sharper edge, something that knew what it was protecting. The four from the first vehicle are going to the front door, Marco said, barely a breath. Standard breach approach. They think the house is occupied. Because of the call, she said. Because they think you're inside waiting for help that isn't coming. He shifted his weight. They'll breach, find it empty, and start looking outward. We have maybe 3 minutes before they think about the ridge. 3 minutes for Lucien to cover 20 minutes of road, Gideon said. His voice was tight with the effort of keeping it level. 17 minutes now, Nora said. She'd been counting. 17 is not 3, Marco said. No. She watched the four shapes reach the front door. So we make noise. Both men looked at her. If they think we're in the house, they'll stay focused on the house, she said. The radio. Transmit on an open frequency. Make it sound like we're calling for a response from inside. Marco processed this for exactly 2 seconds. Then he keyed his radio and said, in a low, urgent voice, Team 2, we need confirmation on the east wing. Team 2, respond. He released. Static. He did it again. Team 2, east wing, respond now. Below them, 2 of the 4 figures at the front door stopped moving. One of them raised a hand, a signal to the others. They pulled back from the door and repositioned. It worked, Nora said. For 90 seconds, Gideon said. Keep doing it, she said to Marco. Vary it. Make it sound like there are more of us than there are. Marco kept transmitting, shifting frequencies, shifting the content. Enough specificity to sound real, not enough to be traceable to a fixed position. She watched the figures below reorganize, moving around the perimeter of the house now, looking for the second team that didn't exist, and in the time that bought, she watched the road and counted. 14 minutes. Then 12. Then one of the men below stopped moving and looked up at the ridge, and she pulled back behind the rock without thinking. They have someone with a scanner, Gideon said. He'd seen it too. Radio goes silent, now. Marco stopped transmitting. The silence that followed had teeth. Below, the man with the scanner was looking directly at the ridge, not moving, not signaling to the others yet, just looking. 10 minutes. She pressed her back against the cold rock and listened to Gideon breathing beside her, and felt the gun in her hands and thought about nothing except the specific mathematics of the next 10 minutes, not what came after. Not Lucian's voice on the radio 5 words at a time, not the letter in her coat pocket or the pink stick on the bathroom floor or any of the 1,000 things that made up the life she was fighting to get back to. Just the rock, the cold, the dark, and the geometry of who was where. The man with the scanner said something to the others. 3 of them started toward the base of the ridge. They're coming up, Marco said. Yes, she said. Nora, I see them. She moved to the edge of the outcropping and found a position. Low, braced, the rock in front of her like a rest, the way she'd been shown. How far before they can see the ridge lip? 60 yards, Gideon said. Maybe 50 at this angle. And they're at 80. She watched them come up through the tree cover, picking their way through the dark, moving fast, confident. People who had been told the target was cornered and alone. 70 yards. She thought, Lucien is on a road. Lucien is in a car doing whatever speed the mountain road allows. Lucien is 8 or 9 minutes away, which is not 3, which is not the timeline they have. 65. Marco fired first, not at the men, to their left, into the tree line, sharp and loud, and the sound of it off the ridge rock was enormous in the mountain night, and all 3 men dropped and scattered, and the advance stopped cold. That buys 30 seconds, he said. 40, Gideon said. From below, the men at the house had heard the shot and were moving now, not toward the ridge, regrouping first, the way trained people do, pulling back to cover and reorienting. She watched them through the dark and counted and recalculated. The man with the scanner was on his radio, calling someone, getting instructions, which meant there was a command structure, someone directing this, and the direction was coming from somewhere that had more information than just what was visible on this ridge. Someone is coordinating them remotely, she said. Yes, Marco said. Victor, or whoever Victor is talking to. He reloaded with the same economic motion she'd watched Gideon use in the utility room. There's a command line above Victor. There always was. Lucien suspected it. The organization behind the organization. She absorbed this. The information about this property. Victor didn't have it. Victor was given it. Yes. By who? Marco's expression was answer enough. The same name Lucian had said on the phone. The man who had been trained by the man Lucian trusted most. The man who had sat at her dinner table. He's not in the city, she said. Not a question. No. Marco's eyes were on the men below. He made it out before Lucian could close the circle. He would have needed somewhere to run to. Someone to run to. A pause. I think he's the one who called you tonight, the courtesy call. She thought about the voice on the phone. Filtered, flat. She'd said she didn't recognize it. She'd believed that. She believed it less now. 6 minutes. The three men who had retreated from Marco's warning shot were regrouping at the base of the ridge. More cautious now, moving in a different formation, one covering while two advanced, professional. We can't hold the ridge, Gideon said. He'd shifted position, and the effort of it showed in his face, a compression around the eyes that was the only visible indicator of how much maintaining his weapon posture was costing him. Not for 6 minutes against 7. 5, Marco corrected, looking at the house. 2 are still at the vehicle. 5, Gideon agreed. Still. She looked at the north approach, the way Marco had come up. The vehicle Lucian had mentioned in the letter, in the outbuilding at the north end. Keys behind the left rear wheel. The vehicle, she said. I told you, a vehicle on a mountain. Not to run, she said. If I start a vehicle at the north end, they hear it. They think we're running. The 2 at the gate vehicle move to intercept, which means they move away from the gate, which means the road is... She watched Marco process this. Which means when Lucian comes up the road in 4 minutes, she said, the gate is unblocked. A silence of about 2 seconds. It's a significant risk to you, Marco said carefully. I know. If they reach the vehicle before Lucian reaches the gate, I know. He looked at her for a long moment. She held his gaze without moving. I'll go, he said. You're the one who can keep them off the ridge for 4 minutes, she said. Gideon can't do it alone. She was already moving. I can start a car. She didn't wait for him to agree. She went down the north face of the ridge in the dark. Not the path she'd used before, but the steeper line, faster and less careful, sliding the last 6 feet on frozen dirt and catching herself against a tree trunk with her forearm and not stopping. She moved through the tree cover along the north perimeter of the property, heard the distant bark of Marco's weapon from the ridge above her, drawing attention upward, keeping them occupied, and found the outbuilding by shape against the dark sky, a single padlock on a hasp. She looked at it for 1 second and then remembered what Gideon had put on the table in the front room, the folding knife. She still had it. She used the blade as a lever on the hasp's mounting screws, which were old and set in wood that had softened, and the second screw pulled free and the hasp swung open and she was inside. The vehicle was an older model pickup truck, dark-colored, the kind of thing that belonged on a mountain road. She went to the left rear wheel and found the key where Lucian had said it would be, held there with a magnetic case. She stood up and looked at the truck and took 1 breath. She got in, started the engine. It turned over loud in the enclosed space, and then she hit the gas and went through the outbuilding's second door, the one on the north face, without opening it first, and the wood splintered outward, and the sound of it added to the sound of the engine. And she drove north along the property perimeter with the headlights on full. From the gate end of the road she heard the shout, men responding, the 2 at the gate vehicle reacting to the sound and the lights exactly the way she'd predicted, moving toward her, moving away from the gate. And she watched in the rearview mirror as their headlights swung to follow. She kept driving, not far, just far enough. She took the truck up the east track until the tree cover closed in enough that a vehicle couldn't follow fast. Then she cut the engine and the lights and got out and pressed into the tree line and listened. Headlights behind her. The gate vehicle coming up the track. From the road below, another engine. Coming from the direction of the city, moving fast. She pressed her back against a pine tree and made herself small in the dark and watched the 2 gatemen's vehicle roll past her position without slowing. Their lights sweeping the track ahead, looking for the truck, finding it 30 yards further on where she'd left it, and stopping. And at that same moment, from the road, the sound of multiple vehicles arriving at the gate, not cautiously, not slowly, not in the manner of people who are unsure what they'll find, in the manner of people who already know. She heard voices she didn't recognize. She heard, after a moment, a voice she did. Not Lucien's. Someone else, shouting an instruction, and then the specific sound of the situation at the house reversing, the defensive posture collapsing, the 7 men who had been advancing now suddenly dealing with a different geometry entirely. She came out of the tree line. One of the gate men heard her and turned. She had the gun up before he completed the turn. He looked at her face, at the gun, at her stance, and made the calculation that most people make when they look at someone who has arrived at the particular side of their own threshold that she had arrived at. And he put his hands up. "Down," she said. "On the ground." He went down. The second man was already running. She let him run. Lucien found her 11 minutes later. She was sitting on the hood of the old pickup truck on the east track with her coat around her and the gun in her lap, and her hands finally, showing the shake she'd been suppressing for the last 40 minutes. The shake was fine. The shake meant the thing that had needed to hold had held for as long as it needed to, and now it could release. And that was the correct sequence of events. She heard him coming, heard the specific weight of his footsteps on the frozen ground, different from Marco's, different from anyone else's. She looked up when he came through the trees. He stopped when he saw her. He covered the remaining distance fast, and then he was in front of her, and his hands were on her face, both of them, tilting it up the way he'd done in the cafe that morning, a lifetime ago, 9 hours ago, checking her with the same focused attention, the same systematic assessment. She let him. "I'm not hurt," she said. He didn't answer. He was still looking. His thumbs moved across her face, her jaw, down to her throat, where the morning's bruises were still there, older and darker now, and he stopped there for a moment. Then his eyes went down to where her hand was pressed, flat and automatic, below her ribs. His jaw moved. He pulled her off the hood of the truck and into him and held her there with both arms, and she felt him breathe. The first real breath she'd felt in him since the cafe. The kind of breath that means the thing that had been compressing has been allowed to decompress. And she put her face against his shoulder and listened to his heart, which was moving faster than he would ever admit to, and slower than hers. They stood like that in the dark and the cold for a while. "Gideon," she said, into his jacket. "He's being loaded into a vehicle. He's stable." A pause. "He'll be angry about the hospital. He hates hospitals. He got shot for me. He'd be more upset about the complaining." She felt him press his jaw briefly against the top of her head. "He'll be fine. The man I left on the ground, Marco has him, and the one who ran, we'll find him." She pulled back enough to look at his face. He was pale under the controlled surface, the mountain cold and the drive and whatever the last 3 hours in the city had been working on him. And he looked, not shattered, Lucien didn't shatter, but worn, the way load-bearing things look when they've been carrying weight at their upper limit for an extended period. "The man from your organization," she said. "The one who got out." His face didn't change. "He didn't get far." "Lucien. He's in custody." He held her gaze. "The non-permanent kind. For now." She understood the distinction. She didn't push it. "Victor," she said. "Handled." He said it in the same tone as the other word. Final. Settled. A door that had been closed. "The organization behind Victor is a different piece of work. It'll take longer, but the chain of command that led to tonight is broken at every link." His eyes didn't waver. "No one who was part of tonight's decision will make another one." She believed him. She always believed him, and she'd stopped being disturbed by how easily she believed him, because she'd made her decision about who Lucien Moretti was a long time ago, and she'd made it with clear eyes. "Tell me it's over," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. "The part that touches you," he said, "is over." Not a politician's answer, not a promise he couldn't keep, just the precise shape of what he actually knew to be true, which was the most she'd ever asked from him. "Okay," she said. He nodded. She reached into her coat pocket and found the folded letter and held it out to him. He looked at it without taking it, recognized it clearly by the fold and the size. 6 months ago," she said. "Yes." "The mattress, the sight lines, the key behind the wheel." "Yes." She looked at him. "You prepared a safe house for me to hide in before I told you I was pregnant, before this morning, before any of this. I prepare for contingencies." "Lucien." He was quiet for a moment, then, "There are things I don't tell you, Because I don't want to put the weight of them on you. Not because I don't trust you, because I... He stopped. This was the edge of the territory where he ran out of practiced language, where the control became visible as effort. Because some things I carry so that you don't have to. She looked at the letter in her hand. Then she folded it back up and put it in her pocket and left it there. I had to shoot a hole in an outbuilding door, she said. His eyes moved. The truck. I drove through it. He looked at her with something that was not quite the almost smile, but was in that direction. Something that lived in the same neighborhood, that acknowledged the specific absurdity of the image without diminishing anything that had built it. I'll have it repaired, he said. I want it left, she said. The hole in the door. He raised an eyebrow, barely. I want to look at it, she said. Later, when things are normal again. I want to be able to look at it. He understood. She saw him understand. The way it moved through his eyes, the specific comprehension of someone who also carries things in their body, keeps physical objects as anchors to important truths. He had his own version of this. She'd never asked about it directly. It stays, he said. She took his hand. They walked back through the trees and onto the property, where Marco was managing the aftermath with the specific brisk efficiency of someone who had done it before. Two of Lucian's people had arrived with the vehicles and were working quietly and without visible distress. The house was lit now, shutters open, the stone facade pale in the headlights. Gideon was seated against the exterior wall by the north door, a proper field dressing on his side now, drinking from a flask someone had given him and looking extremely displeased about the situation in the specific way of people who manage discomfort by being annoyed at its inconvenience. You started the truck, he said when he saw her. I did. You drove through the outbuilding door. Yes. He looked at Lucien. She drove through the outbuilding door. I know, Lucien said. I told her to go to the bedroom. I heard. Gideon looked back at her, and the annoyance shifted by some small degree into something else, something that didn't have a name between them yet, but was clearly in the process of acquiring one. Next time I tell you to go to the bedroom, he said, I'd appreciate it if you actually went to the bedroom. I'll consider it, she said. He almost smiled, almost. She sat down on the ground beside him, not carefully, just down, cross-legged on the cold stone, because her body had decided that vertical was no longer a priority, and leaned her head back against the wall and looked up at the mountain sky, which was doing what mountain skies do in the last hour before dawn, going from pure black to something that was not quite yet blue, but was making a preliminary argument for it. Lucien sat beside her on the ground. He didn't make a production of it. He just sat, coat and all, on the stone, close enough that his shoulder was against hers. She felt him reach across and take her hand in the dark. She held it. The baby's fine, she said. I know that's what you're not asking. Yes, he said. I checked. In the truck. Before I got out. She'd pressed both hands flat below her ribs in the 20 seconds between cutting the engine and opening the door. No pain. No indication of anything but the ordinary physical weight of a life continuing to do what it was doing, regardless of what was happening around it. It's fine. He didn't say anything. He turned her hand over and pressed his thumb into her palm and held it there. She thought about this bathroom floor at 6 a.m, the pink lines, the fear she'd felt then, not the fear of tonight, which was clean and directional and had something to push against, but the other kind, the ambient kind that came from not knowing what shape the future would take or whether she was strong enough to fill it. She thought about the letter in her pocket and the clock in the bathroom and the mattress in the east bedroom and all the invisible architecture Lucien had been building around her for 3 years, not control. She'd lived inside control, she knew what it looked like, but something structurally different, something that made room for her to be fully herself inside it, something that prepared for the worst, not so that she would need it, but so that if she needed it, it would be there. She thought about what she'd become in the last 6 hours. Not someone new, something that had been there all along but hadn't had occasion to surface, something she'd first found traces of in the wreckage Ethan Rourke had left behind, that she'd built slowly and imperfectly over years, and that tonight had been required to be complete. She wasn't afraid anymore. She recognized this as probably temporary, that fear, like most honest things, came back in its own time. But for this specific moment, sitting on the stone with her shoulder against Lucien's and the sky going gray-blue above the tree line, the fear was absent, and what was in its place was something quieter and more durable. The sound of Marco's voice somewhere around the corner, low and organized, the creak of vehicle doors. Gideon shifting his weight against the wall and making a sound of profound personal grievance about the quality of the flask he'd been given. Ordinary sounds. Her hand where it was. "The Haverford acquisition," she said. "Still moving," Lucian said. "The transition. Still real." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. "How long?" she said. "Honestly, all of it." "How long?" He was quiet for a moment. 14 months. If nothing else breaks wrong. She did the math against a due date she didn't have the exact number for yet. "That's before." "Yes." His thumb pressed into her palm again. "That's before." She closed her eyes for a moment and felt the cold in the stone and his shoulder against hers, and the letter in her pocket, and the gun she'd put down somewhere. Marco had taken it, she thought, without her noticing, and everything that the last 24 hours had cost and changed and stripped away, until what was left was just the essential thing, clean and heavy and hers. "I need to tell you something," she said. He waited. "This morning, on the bathroom floor." She opened her eyes and looked at the sky, which was actually blue now, the first pale, definite blue of it coming in from the east. "I was scared because I thought it changed the math, that a baby would be leverage, that it would make us more vulnerable." She paused. "I was wrong about what kind of scared I was. I was scared the way you're scared of things you want very much. Not because they're dangerous, because losing them would be." He didn't respond immediately. He turned her hand over in his again, looking at it the way he sometimes looked at things he wanted to understand completely. "I know," he said quietly. "I know you knew," she said. "I just wanted to say it myself." He lifted her hand and pressed his mouth briefly against the back of it. Not dramatic, just the fact of it, the physical truth of it, the way he made everything, clear and certain and without any wasted motion. The sky kept going blue. Gideon complained about the flask again to no one in particular. Marco came around the corner of the house and said, without looking at them sitting on the ground, that there was coffee inside if anyone wanted it, and then went back around the corner, which was the most tactful thing she'd ever seen him do. She didn't move yet. Neither did Lucienne. The mountains had the particular quality of early morning that she suspected they always had. That quality of having witnessed something in the night and absorbed it completely, and prepared, without commentary or ceremony, to simply continue. The trees were dark shapes becoming green shapes. The gravel was gray becoming its actual color. Things were becoming what they actually were, in the light, which was the thing that light did regardless of what had happened in the dark. She would have her first prenatal appointment. She would call the doctor whose card had been sitting in her nightstand for 3 weeks. She would find out the exact number of weeks and the exact due date and the exact shape of the thing that was coming, which was no longer a secret or a fear, but a fact she was ready to hold in the actual light of day. Lucian would finish the Haverford acquisition and the 13 other pieces of the puzzle he was building, the legitimate dynasty he was raising on the bones of a different kind of power. It would take 14 months. She would watch him do it, not from a distance, but from wherever she chose to stand, which was beside him and not behind him, a distinction she had established early and that he had never once challenged. There would be other things, problems she couldn't predict, costs she hadn't calculated yet. The man who had gotten out of Lucian's city operation before the circle closed, who Marco would find eventually, in whatever way Marco found things. The second layer of organization above Victor, which Lucian had said would take longer, and which she believed would be handled because she had watched him handle things, and she understood his particular brand of patience, which was not the passive kind but the kind that dismantles things methodically, piece by piece, until there was nothing left to threaten anything he loved. She had driven through an outbuilding door in the dark with a gun in her coat, and 9 weeks of the future pressing quiet and continuous against the inside of her body, and she had held a ridge, and she had told a man to get on the ground, and he had listened, and she had sat in the cold and counted minutes and made decisions she hadn't known she was capable of, and none of it had broken her. And that was the thing she would keep. Not the fear, not the bruising on her throat, not the name of the man who had betrayed them, or the photograph of herself taken through a long lens by someone who thought she was a vulnerability. She would keep the knowledge of what she could do when it was required. That, and the hole in the outbuilding door. The coffee smell reached them from inside the house, and she finally moved, stood, brushed the cold from her coat, reached down and took Lucian's hand and pulled once. And he stood beside her, and they were the same height when she was on the step above the ground. And he wasn't. And she looked at his face in the first real light of the morning, and he looked at hers, and there was nothing that needed to be said right now that they hadn't already said. And some things that needed to be said later that would wait without rotting because they had the time for them now. She went inside. He followed. The door closed on the morning, and the mountains were just mountains again. And the gravel was the color it actually was. And the old stone house on the ridge held the smell of coffee and the sound of Gideon's continued editorial on the quality of the flask. And somewhere below, 3 hours down a mountain road, a city was waking up inside the last ordinary morning before it became something else. Before the Haverford deal closed and the empire shifted and the child that was coming entered a world that its father had spent everything remaking for it. The clock in the bathroom, when Nora finally looked at it, read 6:41. She trusted it.